She returned after 3 days in the woods, but she wasn't alone. The village bell tolled twice in the mountain fog, and the windows of Cedar Veil brightened one by one like watchful eyes. Then she stepped out of the tree line, May Lin mud clinging up to her knees, pine needles caught in her hair, as if the forest itself had tried to keep her. In her hand was a braided ring of cedar, a promise from a place that doesn't use words. She wasn't alone. Two small shapes clung to her coat fur, matted with blood, and Burr's eyes too big for their faces. Two baby Bigfoots, cold, hurting, afraid. May's voice was scarcely more than breath, as if she might break the silence by speaking too loud. "Don't run. Please. Their mother asked me to save them." At the edge of the pines, something very tall shifted. Yellow eyes caught a scrap of lantern light and sank back into the dark. Not a charge, not a roar, just a mother who had followed her children to the border of our world and stopped there. For a heartbeat, the whole village held its breath. People flinched, some drew back a few lifted rifles. Then the sheriff's voice cut through low, steady hold. "Look at the little ones. The mountain keeps its unwritten laws. If you see that shape, bar your doors. If you find those tracks, build the fire high and don't look back. But some nights force you to rewrite your own rules." 3 days earlier, at the bottom of a damp ravine, May had learned a language without words. 2 soft clicks meant calm, 2 taps meant water, a palm to the chest meant friend. The Bigfoot mother had pressed the cedar ring into May's hand, an oath older than anything written by men. 3 days in the forest taught her this wild kindness can warm a heart, but cannot clean a wound. Courage can scatter predators, but cannot break a fever. Moonlight can guide a traveler along a cliff, but cannot replace a lamp and a pot of boiling water. The little ones needed clean bandages, boiled water medicine. The forest had none of that. The village did. By the evening of the 3rd day, the mother stood pointed first to the cubs, then to the far glow of the village, then touched the cedar ring in May's hand. It was her way of saying, "Take them. I trust you." So tonight, May led them through the mud and mist. Branches moved in parallel somewhere in the trees like invisible escorts. At the bridge, someone raised a rifle. May stepped in front of the little ones and spoke with a calm, shaped by fire and rain. "If you have to aim at someone, aim at me. But let the children in." The silence lasted long enough for a few extra heartbeats. Then the sheriff lowered his hand. The clinic door swung open, and warm light spilled onto the road like a promise. Inside, cotton and warmth would take up the work the forest had begun tenderness. Outside, beyond the fence, the tall shadow still stood, neither stepping forward nor turning away. A mother guarding her children's world from the far side of ours. May hung the cedar ring on the window ledge beside the lantern. In Cedar Veil, that sign means safe. The figure in the trees eased back a single step, not gone, only retreating to see more clearly. We were not being hunted. We were being watched over. Before we go inside that clinic and learn what truly happened in those 3 days among the pines, tell me where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments. And when this chapter ends, rate the story from 0 to 10. Some legends don't fade with time. They simply change places, stepping out of the dark, reaching out a hand, and quietly saying, "Please help." Part 1. The Choice at the Tree Line. The first night tasted like metal on May Lin's tongue. Rain kept missing the ravine, wasting itself on the ridge, and the cold slid down the stone like a blade. She crouched in the shallow of a root bowl, the 2 little ones pressed to her sides, their breaths quick and hot against her coat. The mother waited across from them, a darker shadow in the dark, upright, watchful, huge. Every time May shifted, the mother's head tilted, not warning, not threat, just calculation. "How far can I trust you?" May unwrapped her scarf, tore it into strips, and tied them around the worst scrapes. She tried not to stare at the hands of the small ones, half like ours, half like earth, padded and clever. When she hummed, they loosened, and when she stopped, they tightened. She learned to breathe like the forest, slow and slower out. 2 soft clicks from her tongue, and their shaking eased. 2 light taps on her knee, and they nudged toward the trickle of water. Palm to her chest and 2 palms smaller, Ferd answered back. "Friend." Near midnight, coyotes began to braid their voices on the ridge. A smaller shape moved behind the mother, and May understood there were others out there keeping their distance, forming a wall that breathed and shifted when danger prowled. A clan, not a myth. Yet even a clan could not boil water or clean a wound. The little one with the limp ran a fever. The other blinked too slowly. Wild kindness had carried them to this hollow. Now they needed more than the wild could give. Before dawn, the mother stepped closer than she had all night. May held still. A musky warmth, a smell of pine and wet stone wrapped around her. The mother lifted one great hand and traced the air, a point at the small ones, a slow draw toward the eastern dark, where the village slept, and then a press of knuckles over her own heart. It was not language the way people mean language, but May felt the shape of it pass through her like a bell strike. Take them, bring them to the lights. I will follow. Day broke in thin slices. May found a flattish stone and set it near a pocket of coals she nursed from a handful of dry needles. She heated river stones, rolled them into the blanket, warmed their feet. The fevered one unclenched its jaw. She washed the scrapes with the cleanest water she could scoop, and whispered about kettles and iodine and a cupboard of bandages she could see in her mind, as if the clinic stood just beyond the next tree. She told them about the sound of a door when it opens for you and not against you. She told them about light. The second day, the clan hovered like weather. Whenever a hawk cut the sky, shoulders shifted and bodies rose. When a buck wandered too near, a sound like wind sent it stumbling away. The mother never touched May, but once, when the fever spiked and the small one whimpered without sound, a great shadow fell across May's hands and blocked the draft. For 1 minute, May was inside the mother's circle, and the cold could not get to her. By evening, the rain finally found them. It came slanted and mean, and the hollow filled with damp. The little ones shivered so hard their teeth clicked. May weighed the scales she had been pretending not to weigh, pride and fear on one side, clean bandages, and heat on the other. The mountain's unwritten laws were loud in her head. Do not bring the forest into the village. Do not fetch the night to your own door. But another law rose up under those like bedrock: if you can carry, carry. If you can save, save. She lifted the lighter one and nodded to the other to hold her coat. The mother rose to her full height, and for a heartbeat May saw what the old stories got wrong and what they got right. Wrong about the rage, right about the size of a love that would follow a child to the edge of the human world and no further. The mother reached down and with impossible gentleness set the cedar ring in May's palm again, as if to say, "This is the bridge. Walk it." Twilight drained out of the ravine. May stepped toward the notch that would lead them to the logging road, then to the bridge, then to the first yellow window of Cedar Veil. Behind her came the soft drag of small feet, and farther back, a heavier rhythm, a sentinel's pace. Branches touched each other above the path and whispered. Once a coyote broke cover and froze at the sight of the mother's silhouette. It left the world by another direction. By the time the stars showed, the forest had folded itself into a corridor. May did not think about rifles or shouts or how the bell would sound when it rang. She thought about a kettle boiling, about a clean cloth cooling a forehead, about a door swinging inward, and a warm square of light poured onto mud. The choice had already been made at the tree line when a hand the size of a shovel blade placed a twig-braided circle in hers and asked for mercy without a word. All she was doing now was keeping her side of the promise. At the last turn before the bridge, the mother halted. May felt it without looking, the way air changes when something larger than fear decides to stop. She glanced back. Yellow eyes hung in the dark like a patient question. May lifted the cedar ring so the faint starlight could thread through it. "I'll bring them to the light," she said. "I'll hang this where you can see it." The eyes did not blink. They did not need to. The path was clear. They walked out of the forest together, one woman, 2 small lives, and a shadow that chose to trust them all the way to the edge of town. Part 2. Crossing the Bridge of Fear. The plank road emerged from the thin rain like a strip of man-made gold, and at the same moment Cedar Veil's bell rolled down the creek bed. May Lynn tightened her grip on the cedar ring. The 2 little ones clung to her coat, short, quick steps, as if afraid the village's heartbeat would catch them before the light could warm them. Behind her, the forest did not move. Yet the air carried the sense of something vast watching, silent, steady, unwilling to leave. At the head of the bridge shapes rose from the guardhouse porch. A rifle lifted. Another man took half a step back as if to brace both his feet, and the old story he'd believed all his life. May didn't change her stance. She slid half a foot forward and stood between the children and the guns like a rock sheltering shoots of spring. "If you must aim, aim at me," she said, her voice so even it surprised her. "But let the children in." Sheriff Cole stepped out of the lamp, glow hat, low coat slick with rain. He looked at the little ones first, then at the tree line. A tiny nod moved along his jaw. "Lower 'em," he said, not a barked command but a key turning. Barrels dipped with the slow pull of habit. No one exhaled loudly, but the tightness in the air eased a notch. "Look," someone whispered. Bandage strips already darkening, matted fur, eyes too tired to fear. In the crowd, a hunter named Riggs curled his lip. "They come once, they'll come again." May turned her head a fraction. "They already came," she said. "They're standing at the forest's edge, not crossing our line. We're the ones who just crossed theirs." A dry click, the clinic door opened. The smell of cotton soap light. Dr. Laura stood in the doorway, hand on the frame eyes, pausing on the ring in May's palm. "Bring them," she said, "and keep that by the window." May walked straight in without looking back. As her foot crossed the threshold, she understood from here on, every movement would be a promise made with hands and eyes, and a language no one teaches, yet everyone hears gentleness. Inside cloth drew from a shelf a drawer, slid cotton bloomed like small clouds. Laura's instructions were simple. Hot water, clean, bring the fever down. May repeated them like a litany. The little ones lay on a scrubbed wooden table. Their shivering shifted from chaos to rhythm like a pond settling when the rain backs off. May set the ring on the sill where the lamp made a warm halo. Outside, the forest's edge stayed quiet, and the feeling of being watched softened into the feeling of being seen. Riggs didn't give up. He stood in the doorway, hat pulled deep, the old smoke of his coat mixing with rain. "You save 'em today," he said. "Tomorrow their mama comes to collect in a way we won't like." Laura didn't look up. Tomorrow can answer for itself. Today does today's work. Sheriff Cole leaned his shoulder against the post eyes on the seam where light met dark. He spoke just loud enough for the right ears. "Cedar Veil's got an old sign for safe, a lantern in the window." May glanced at the lantern in the corner. She didn't need more words. She lit it and hung it beside the cedar ring. The flame was small but stubborn, like a single sentence placed exactly where it belongs. Laura allowed herself a brief smile. "Good," she said. "Now clean bandages." Cloth wrapped a small calf. A spoon touched the rim of a cup. Laura checked a brow. "The fever will drop." May told the children softly about the kettle beginning to murmur on the stove, about the towel warming in her hands, about a mattress as soft as a cloud kept back just for them. Ordinary words that feel like miracles when you've just crossed a bridge everyone swore didn't exist. Outside, voices braided and thinned. Some were afraid, some were curious. Some sounded like people waking from an old story. Cole said, "Home. Hang a light. Tonight needs lamps more than talk." The porch emptied. The road returned to rain and quiet. But farther out where the forest began, something remained like a signature written in breath on damp paper. When clean bandages lay where they should and the two small chests slipped into sleep, May finally allowed herself to look through the glass. She saw nothing but dark trunks, wet rails, and one patch of shadow thicker than the others. She didn't wave. She only tipped her head the way a person says thank you in a language that isn't theirs. Outside, the darker patch didn't answer. It didn't have to. The bridge they'd built was still warm from human hands. May sat at the table's edge to steady her own. "They'll be all right," Laura said. "We'll break the fever. Then we'll talk about tomorrow." May nodded. She didn't speak of tomorrow. She watched the lantern and the cedar ring hanging side by side, one man-made light, one sign from the woods sharing the same sill. If anything in this world can translate between two realms, it would begin here. Part 3. The Lantern Code. Night came down clean and deliberate, the kind of dark that makes a village listen to itself. The lantern in the clinic window burned a patient circle beside the cedar ring, and the rule Sheriff Cole had spoken spread quietly. House to house, one light means safe. People obeyed in the way mountain people do when the rule feels older than the person saying it. Windows bloomed one by one, and Cedar Veil looked less like a line of buildings and more like a necklace laid across wet earth. Inside, the fever broke in fits, then in a sudden surrender that left the little ones limp and damp with sleep. Dr. Laura traded the first set of bandages for clean, checked the pulse at the neck, and nodded once without ceremony. "They'll mend," she said. "They need rest, warmth, time." Mei Lin let the words settle like stones in a jar, something to weigh against the sounds outside the soft scuff of boots that didn't enter the hush of people choosing silence over a story they might tell badly. Riggs leaned in the doorway again, working his jaw as if chewing an argument. "You're training them to come back," he said. "A lantern's a welcome sign." May didn't lift her eyes from the children. "It's also a promise," she said. "Safe doesn't mean open." Sheriff Cole answered from the porch without turning around. "Safe means we won't fire unless fired upon," he said. "It doesn't mean we forget what lives in the pines." Near midnight, a pressure changed the kind you feel in your teeth before lightning hits. May looked up at the window. The part of the tree line that had been merely darker than dark became a shape, then a presence. She didn't move, didn't speak. The mother had come closer, not onto the road, not past the fence, but close enough for the lantern light to find the worn edges of her ruff and the sheen of wet hair along one massive arm. No noise, only watchfulness big enough to fill the window frame. Cole stepped to the sill and, with a deliberate calm that made May's throat tighten, lifted a second lantern from the floor and set it next to the first unlit. His thumb hovered over the striker. He glanced at May. "Two lights means danger," he said. "If I strike this, it's because something's wrong and we need the ridge awake." May held his gaze. "What would make you light it?" she asked. "Something human," he said. "Or something that thinks like human harm." He didn't have long to wait. From the alley by the feed store came the clink of metal against metal, a rhythm too tidy to be accident. Riggs stiffened. Cole didn't look at him. "Stay where you are," he said, and moved into the rain. May went to the window and saw them, two men who hadn't stood on the porch earlier, faces deep under brims, a coil of wire in one hand and a set of teethy traps in a sack. Poacher logic had come to town. If the forest brought its myth to the door would make itself a machine to catch it. Cole called their names. He knew everyone's names and held up one palm. "Turn around," he said. "Go home." The nearer one laughed without humor. "You going to stop us with stories?" May felt anger rise in the foolish shape of a question. How is it that the only time some men look brave is when they're about to hurt something that will not hit back? She didn't speak it. She lifted her hand instead and touched the cedar ring on the sill, a reminder to herself more than a sign to anyone else. Promise not panic. The poacher with the wire stepped toward the fence, setting his trap low where shadow swallowed detail. In the same breath, a sound unstitched the night, not a roar, not even a warning, but a note like wood slow splitting in winter. It came from the tree line, and it carried more history than volume. The men froze. That was when Riggs chose his moment, lifting his rifle from where he'd hidden it under his coat. Cole's voice snapped once no, and the striker on the second lantern rasped. Flame caught. Two lights in the window. Across Cedar Veil, windows flared brighter. The bell did not ring. The lights were the bell. Men and women stepped onto their porches the way you step onto a frontier you'd rather not cross, careful, alert, unafraid to be seen afraid. Laura set her hand on May's shoulder, but didn't pull her back. "Hold steady," she said. "The children sleep because you made a border for them." At the fence, a new figure arrived, the elder from the ravine, huge and still, with a steadiness that made the poachers look feverish. He did not approach the trap. He placed his palm flat on the earth, then raised that same palm open toward the men behind the wire. It was a gesture so human that for a second, May forgot which world she stood in. "Stop it," said as clearly as any sheriff's badge. Riggs's rifle wavered. Cole stepped between the barrel and the tree line and put his body where the shot would have to go. "Not tonight," he said. "Not with two children on a table behind me." Something in the arrangement, a sheriff blocking a hunter, a healer behind a window, a village lit like a map, an elder with his hand in the rain tilted the scale. The poacher with the wire spat once a small, ugly sound and backed away. The other shouldered his sack and said nothing. They went out by the road they'd come in on, smaller under the lamps than they must have felt in the alley's dark. Cole didn't chase them. He turned, came back to the sill, and blew out the second lantern. One flame remained. The code folded closed. The elder lowered his hand. The mother took one backward step into the thicker black. Cedar Veil exhaled. May leaned her forehead against the cool pane for a heartbeat, and then returned to the table. The little ones slept without shiver now, mouths, soft hands open. She spoke low, not sure who she was speaking to, the children, the watchers, herself. Safe doesn't mean open, she repeated, but it doesn't mean blind. On the sill, wood and fire kept their quiet vigil, a ring from the woods. A human light, two alphabets of trust learning each other's letters. Toward dawn, the rain quit for good, leaving the world rinsed and particular. The forest did not vanish. It never does. It simply stepped back into the place it holds when we are wise enough to hold ours. And somewhere between a clinic lamp and a cedar ring, a truce learned how to breathe. Part 4. Night Watch and the Choice. The village settled into a held breath that lasted hours. Sheriff Cole posted 2 watchers at the end of the street and told them to keep their eyes open and their mouths shut. Dr. Laura dozed upright in her chair with her hand still near the children's feet, the way a captain sleeps with fingers on the wheel. May Lynn refused the cot. She sat by the window where the lantern burned, and the cedar ring made its small circle of shadow, and she let the dark do what it was built to do, test the truth of what people said in daylight. Riggs came back, once hat in his hands, for the first time anyone could remember. He hovered in the doorway as if the threshold itself were a thing to be asked permission from. "I was wrong to bring a gun into a room with children," he said, looking past May toward the sleeping shapes. It wasn't an apology dressed for Sunday. It was a statement of fact, heavy and plain. Cole nodded once, nothing more. Laura didn't wake. May said thank you, because sometimes the smallest words are the only bridge available. After midnight, the younger child stirred. Breath shortened into a hitch that lifted and fell without rhythm. May rested her palm on the little chest and felt the stutter, the old fight between rest and fear. She spoke about ordinary things so the room could remember how to be ordinary, the way soap squeaks on a clean floor, the way rain smells like iron at night, the way light feels on your face when you've come too far in the dark. The breaths lengthened, found each other, and matched. She didn't look up, but she knew the mother had drawn nearer again. Some distances can be felt through glass and air, the way a song can be felt through walls. Cole kept his rounds in the rain, circling past the clinic at measured intervals, not to protect the building from the forest, but to protect the moment from human error. When he stepped inside, he didn't bring the weather with him. He shook it off at the eaves and stood in the warm like a man in a church. "Town will want a word at sunup," he said softly. "Not a trial, just a word. People need a way to file a new fact where it doesn't tear the shelves down." May half smiled. "A word is better than a bullet." "Most nights," he answered. An hour before dawn, the smallest sounds sharpened water ticking from a gutter, a board in the porch settling the end of a storm unwinding from the ridge. The children slept loose and heavy. The fever had receded to the corners, grumbling but beaten. On the sill, the lantern guttered once and steadied as if remembering its job. May touched the cedar ring, and the gesture drew the whole night into focus. This had never been about ownership. It had been about stewardship, about whether 2 worlds could carry a single fragile line without snapping it. When gray finally bled into the black, and the clinic's lamp became one light among 100, Cole came to the window and looked to the trees. "If they're going to go, it should be soon," he said. Laura woke fully at the sentence and checked the children with quick, competent touches. "They're strong enough to travel to the fence and back if they must," she said. "If there's a handoff, let it be clean." She met May's eyes. "You'll know if it's time." May did know, not because of any sign she could have drawn, but because the room itself felt like a raft at the end of a ferrying work, complete not because the river was finished, but because this crossing was. She wrapped each child in a blanket that smelled faintly of soap and pine. She told them about warmth they would carry inside now heat no rain could take. She lifted the lighter one and nodded for the other to hold her coat. Cole opened the door without a word. Laura followed as far as the threshold and stood with her hand on the jamb like a blessing. They walked into a dawn that hadn't made up its mind about color. The street was empty but awake. Behind curtains, faces held very still. At the fence line, May stopped. She didn't call, she didn't wave. She simply stood with the children and let the moment announce itself. The mother came out of the tree line the way weather comes, inevitable and larger than anyone's opinion. Behind her, the elder waited at the path's mouth, present enough to be counted and distant enough to teach the village what a boundary looks like. For a long 10 seconds, nothing moved. Then May took one step forward and knelt. She didn't offer the children the way you offer a thing. She let them choose with their bodies. The limping one leaned toward the mother's reach. The other looked at May first as if confirming a direction, then turned and went too. The mother gathered them with a care that corrected centuries of rumor. No growl, no flinch, only a sound so soft it barely existed outside of touch. May stayed kneeling. "I will keep the sign," she said, and though she spoke in human words, she spoke with her hands as well, palm to chest palm, toward the ring on the clinic sill beyond the fence, palm open to the space between. The mother watched, and something unreadable passed across her face that was not human and did not need to be understood. She lifted her own palm and set it briefly against the fence post where the cedar ring would hang. Trust is a trail made of single prints. There were 2 on the post now. Riggs stood at the corner, hat still in his hands. He made no speech. He only looked and did not look away. That in the complicated math of a small town was more than enough. Cole's stance loosened almost invisibly the way a rope eases when a weight transfers without breaking the knot. Laura exhaled the long exhale of someone whose work has shifted from urgency to recovery. The mother stepped back first, teaching the grammar of departure. The little ones peered over her arms at the village they would remember, not as a trap, but as a room with a lamp and a woman who spoke softly about ordinary things. May rose and answered the lesson with one of her own she did not follow. She stood exactly where a friend stands when a door closes on the right side of a visit. When the trees received them, Cedar Veil didn't cheer. It did something harder. It returned to itself without pretending the night hadn't happened. Lamps stayed in windows even after the sun cleared the ridge. People went about the business that keeps a town standing, and in each small chore there was the echo of a larger decision safe. Doesn't mean open, but it also doesn't mean blind. May laid the cedar ring back on the clinic sill. Cole came to stand beside her and watch the place where forest became rumor again. "Town meeting at dusk," he said. "I'll say we hung a light and it held." May nodded. "Tell them that's all we did." Laura set fresh water to boil and began a list in her head of small supplies they would need if the children returned for a check gauze salve patience. Outside, the day brightened, as if relieved to have been consulted. Nothing was settled forever. It never is. But for one full turn of the earth, a code had worked. A fence had been something other than a dare, and 2 worlds had carried a fragile line without snapping it. In a story about monsters, the scariest thing had turned out to be human haste, and the bravest act had been to wait with a light. Watched. Not alone. By evening, Cedar Veil looked ordinary again. Smoke lifting straight up doors standing open for the cool children arguing about nothing at all. Ordinary except for the lamps that stayed in the windows long after they were needed, and the way people paused at the edge of the plank road as if listening for a language they hadn't known they could hear. Mei Lin walked the length of the street with the cedar ring in her pocket. She could feel the weave through the cloth, rough, precise, stubborn. At the clinic, she washed the last of the dried sap from her hands and folded the blankets the way Laura liked them folded. "They'll sleep warm tonight," Laura said, meaning the little ones, and maybe meaning everyone. Sheriff Cole signed a brief report no one would read twice and slid it under the blotter. A light hung, and it held, he said. It was enough. At dusk, May stood on the clinic porch and looked toward the pines. She didn't expect a sign. The forest doesn't perform. Still, the feeling came, the particular weight of being regarded without being claimed. She took the ring from her pocket and hung it back on the sill beside the lantern. The flame found the gaps in the braid and made a quiet constellation. She spoke softly, not knowing who needed the sentence. "Mercy is older than fear," she said, "and trust is a trail you walk one step at a time." Somewhere out there, a branch resumed its natural shape after bearing a careful weight. That was all. Life resumed with new edges. Riggs brought Laura a crate of jars without explanation. Cole drafted a sign to post at the bridge. "One lantern means safe, two means danger. No shots fired without order." People nodded when they read it, the way you nod at something you'll be measured against. And May began keeping a small basket by the door. Clean cloth, boiled water, a scrap of soap, a habit of readiness. On some evenings, just before the ridge swallowed the sun, two small shadows appeared at the fence and pressed their hands to the rails as if testing the shape of the world they'd only visited. May would lift her palm and answer, "Friend, water safe," and they'd answer back with the shy grammar she now knew by heart. The mother never came to the fence. She didn't need to. The forest has a vantage you can only earn by standing your ground. If you listened hard enough, you could hear how the story would be told by people who hadn't been there. They would lose the quiet and keep the size. That's what happens to stories. But in Cedar Veil, they kept the quiet too. They remembered that the scariest thing had been human haste, and the bravest act had been to wait with a light. If this tale found you, if some part of it felt like a lamp in your own window, tell us where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments, and when the story closes, rate it from 0 to 10. Subscribe for the next night in the pines. Some legends don't fade, they watch. And sometimes when we're wise enough to watch back, they ask us plainly to help.